Hey guys, how's it going? You know what? I've actually kind of been enjoying my time off of stream. I think that it's kind of good for me to take some time off of stream because I've been focusing a bit more on like YouTube stuff. I've been doing like more recordings and stuff. I feel like I don't really get to talk to you guys, the more the YouTube crowd, because like for the most part, like how I've been doing it for a long time is I've just been streaming on Twitch, and YouTube has just kind of been more of like, here are my highlights from Twitch. And I think that maybe it kind of works easier for me, to be honest. Here's the thing. Let me be real for 1 second. YouTube is hard. YouTube is about discipline. Because in Twitch, it's very easy. All you have to do is make sure you're doing the right hours every day. It's like, going to school. You show up and you're good. Whereas YouTube, it's like, because you're completely unstructured except for what you set for yourself, and there's no one accounting, there's no accountability. Every time I say I'm gonna take the day off streaming and I'm just gonna do YouTube videos, I just end up like jerking off all day. And it's just so difficult for me to actually focus on YouTube. But on days where, I'm just kind of like not really feeling the stream, and I actually am able to actually focus on YouTube instead, I end up really enjoying those days. So maybe I'll make an effort to do this more often, but knowing me, it's going to be too hard. Alright guys, so today, as you can see in the title of the video, we're doing a deck guide for Lee Sin. I wish I did more deck guides. I used to do a lot more of this stuff, but like I said, YouTube is just very difficult. So Lee Sin got absolutely like mega buffed in this update, down to 4 mana, and suddenly there's been kind of like all-in Lee Sin decks flooding ranked ladder. This is a very powerful deck. It is currently somewhat undecided whether it's tier 1. There's still some people that are saying it's tier 2. I'm personally in the camp of saying Lee Sin is tier 1. Now you'll see this reflected on my website, which, hey, look at this. It's ooh, an update. Wow, how did this happen? Yeah, you didn't think I'd do this, did ya? Yeah, I've been a bad boy. I haven't been great about my website up to date. I mentioned if the last updated is more than a week old, check out here instead, which is the Mobiletics meta tier list, which I might actually just like, move off the site entirely and just start linking that out instead. Because I also work on the Mobiletics tier list, and they end up being kind of like functionally, for the most part, pretty much the same exact list. Because of course, I mean, we come to a consensus, and that consensus is like, what we expect the meta to look like. But yeah, anyway, Lee Sin combo is on the tier 1 of the website. I'm gonna go ahead and start showing this deck off and talking about what is so good about it and what makes it so great. So, oops, where are we here? Okay, hang on. Oh, I found it. All right, this is my version of Lee Sin combo. This is built off of looking at a lot of like the stats and a lot of different versions. This is kind of like personally the version that has worked the best for me so far. I think it ended up very close to Alan's version as well, which he was running 3 Behold the Infinite, 2 Palm, 0 Vigor, and 1 Bastion. So it's like a 4-card change, basically, from that version. But ultimately, like, the thing about Lee Sin decks is that there's not actually that many ways to build them. Like, I've seen 4 or 5 different versions built by different people, and they all are literally 1 or 2 cards off of each other. The biggest thing is that there's a lot of people still running Taric in Lee Sin, and I really don't like Taric in a Lee Sin deck. Lee Sin, especially like now that he's kind of like, more lean, you want to be able to build entirely around him, and it is really important that Solari Priestess, whenever it pulls Written in the Stars, whenever Solari Priestess pulls Written in the Stars, you want to make sure your Written in the Stars is pulling Lee Sin every time. Taric is not only kind of like having a hard time doing that, but the biggest problem with Taric is that Lee Sin wants your deck to be full of spells, and Taric wants your deck to have some more units attached to it, which hasn't really worked out as well. It's just not as valuable going in that direction. Alright, anyway, that's enough about, I'll talk more about the exact build of the deck a little bit later, but I'm just going to go ahead and get in it easy with the actual guide itself. As always, check the pinned comment, because I'm going to have in the pinned comment a link to this deck's Mobiletics post. What that means is if I update the deck, which I probably will only update it 1 or 2 cards, but hey, that's what deck building is. 1 or 2 cards makes a difference. You'll find an updated version in the pinned comment under this video. So if you're going to try to play this deck, check there first because I might have changed 1 or 2 cards. Alright, so here's the kind of deck Lee Sin is. If you aren't familiar with Lee Sin, basically he's a champion that needs a high amount of synergy and a level up to be valuable. When he's leveled up, he Dragon's Rages enemies that he challenges. Dragon's Rage is, you know, kicking an enemy into the Nexus, striking both if the enemy survives recall it. What this means though is that if you give him Overwhelm, which we do in this deck with Zenith Blade, if you give Lee Sin Overwhelm and he has 10 attack, he will deal exactly 20 damage to the Nexus, because he will Dragon's Rage his blocker that he challenges into the Nexus, dealing 10 damage, and then his Overwhelm 10 attack will be able to deal 10 to face because it doesn't have a blocker anymore. This is really powerful, and the entire basis for this deck is combo-y. It's actually going to play out somewhat similar to old Ezreal Karma style decks, which is a little weird to say, but we're using a lot of the same concepts. We're using Claws of the Dragon, Eye of the Dragon, a lot of spells to just stay alive and stall, and a kind of like one-punch combo finisher. The only difference is Lee Sin usually comes well before a Karma Ezreal would be able to come online. So that's the kind of deck that this is. It's going to be a little bit higher on the difficulty scale. I have this listed on my website as a hard deck, and it is a hard deck. Ultimately, it's not going to be quite as punishing as something like Ezreal Karma, and if you follow this guide, you'll actually be able to play it pretty well. This is a very good deck to be, for example, climbing into Masters with. Let's go ahead and talk about the early mulligans for this deck. Now, mulliganing is really complex in Runeterra. At the end of the day, people always ask me for mulligan tips, and I always say, all I can say, like, you can't go by rules of thumb. Just plan out the first 4 turns of the game in your head and ask yourself, like, you know, how you want to modify that. And this includes, like, what you expect the opponent to be doing on those turns. That's really, like, at the end of the day, every time you're mulliganing, you really should be thinking about that. But to give you a starting point, Eye of the Dragon and Claws of the Dragon should normally be kept in your opening hand, with the exception of the very, very greedy matchups. For example, if you find yourself against like War Mother's Control, which is like Trundle Shadow Isles, if you find yourself against like the Mirror Match, which is, you know, Mono, Lee Sin, no other champions, then you can start kicking away Eye of the Dragon and Claws of the Dragon for combo pieces or stuff that scales into late game value. In those matchups, you're going to want stuff like Deep Meditation, stuff like Even Deny you can keep, stuff like Behold the Infinite for, you know, the value, and Pale Cascade, which Pale Cascade you should probably be keeping most of the time, right? Spacey Sketcher I would consider to be not necessarily an auto keep. You don't want to be playing this on turn 1 most of the time. You don't want to be playing it as a 1-drop most of the time. But there's plenty of situations where you do, and that's going to basically allow you to sometimes hurt aggression. Like if the opponent opens turn 1 with like Legion Saboteur, then yeah, you bet I'm playing my Spacey Sketcher. But mostly you should think of this card as a mulligan, right? It has a body, and don't get baited into the 1/1 body. You don't want to deal that 1/1 chip damage unless your opponent has something that actually you gain specific value by blocking early, which sometimes happens, but in often situations, like they'll play a 2/2, which isn't a great block, or they'll play a Precious Pet, which you can't even block anyway. If you aren't getting a good block with Spacey Sketcher, do not play it early. Now, in most situations, you do want to be keeping Mentor of the Stones and Solari Priestess in your opening hands as well. These are going to be great. And if you're against an aggro deck, and if you have any kind of early play at all, I would absolutely be keeping Concussive Palm in my opening hand. Now, the big question is, you know, what about some of the kind of like combo pieces, like Zenith Blade, like Deep Meditation, like Lee Sin? Well, in slower matchups, I'd keep Zenith Blade in my opening hand, you know, super greedy matchups, but I wouldn't normally keep it in the opening hand against like any sort of like tempo deck, like aggro or mid-range, those kinds of decks. Lee Sin himself, and this is kind of like one of the bigger questions, are we keeping Lee Sin in our opening hand? And yeah, against greedy decks, absolutely. Against like mid-range decks, pretty much absolutely. Against very aggressive decks, I would still normally be keeping Lee Sin in my opening hand, but it really depends on the rest of my hand at that point. If I'm kicking deep, if I don't have early stability with like Claws or Eye, then I would probably kick Lee Sin in that matchup. Claws and Eye are basically the way this deck survives the early game. They are super, super, super essential to your like anti-aggro strategy. In fact, these cards are the entirety of your anti-aggro strategy. If you aren't fighting them against aggro, you're gonna have trouble. Okay, now we're through with Mulligan. Let's move on to kind of like general tips. So something really important when you're playing Eye of the Dragon and Claws of the Dragon, as well as Deep Meditation, is to really plan around their turns a bit. There's going to be a few turns where you might want to cast a spell, but if you plan ahead to next turn, maybe you have an Eye of the Dragon on the board or a Claws of the Dragon in your hand. If you plan around to next turn, instead of casting that spell, you might want to, you know, play, pass your turn, bank a mana, and play 2 different spells on the same turn, right? If that makes sense. The way that these decks work is like, in a weird way, almost similar to Nightfall decks in that way, right? Because like Claws and Eye are kind of the same thing, where it's like they're the same thing as Nightfall, where you kind of want to bank a bit of mana so that you can, you know, double play on the same turn. If you think about it as the same condition, it might make it a little bit easier. Next, we're going, oops, that's not right. Next, we're going to have to talk about, you know, the different Celestial cards that we're getting off of Spacey Sketcher and when we should be thinking about using them. So let me go ahead and pull up the Celestials. So very similarly to what I was talking about the Spacey Sketcher, by the way. Oh, side point, clarify. This is one of the highest skill ceiling cards in the entire game. Hell, this is the highest skill ceiling card in the entire game. You're going to have to really, really, really plan out your Spacey Sketcher. Now, I mentioned the reason you often don't want to play at turn 1. Well, I mentioned that you don't want to play at turn 1. The reason you don't often want to play at turn 1 is because you often want more information to better decide what pick you're going to go. And as the game goes on, you get more information. Something that's really important is just planning ahead what you are going to want to do in different matchups, right? And depending on the matchup, you need to be planning ahead like 5 or 6 turns. For example, something that's really, really important is if you're against like scouts, you know, a lot of people will look at the board and they'll be like, oh, I'll pick the Serpent because I'll kill a Cithria of Cloudfield for free, and that's really nice. And sometimes you could possibly be forced into that, but if you're against like Demacia Tempo, you kind of should always be picking Crescent Strike if you can. Because on the turn where they play Genevieve, you need to be able to Crescent Strike them or you will basically lose the game. This is just far too important. I find myself in this deck in particular picking Moonsilver a lot just because of the negative 1 mana spell trigger, right? Sometimes, and again, look at your Eye of the Dragon, your Claws of the Dragon when you're thinking about Moonsilver. Sometimes you will have to pick Moonsilver just to enable Eye or Claws or Deep Meditation or Lee Sin's level up. But if, you know, you're trying to deal with aggression, Moonsilver is obviously not going to be that good. The Trickster's alright as a body against like any sort of like potential elusive strategy. In particular, it works best against like elusive 2-attack units like Zap Sprayfin or Golden Narwhal or the one Lunar Shadestalker, I think it's called, from Nightfall deck. Those are great decks for the Trickster because it can block it and then survive those as well. Absolutely perfect. When in doubt, pick Messenger. You can never go wrong with Messenger. But I wanted to mention one last thing in particular, which is Equinox. Like Crescent Strike, you really have to think about the win condition. Like, with Equinox, a lot of people don't pick it because a lot of people will look at the board and be like, well, Equinox is not good on this board. But just think of the matchup. Think of what your opponent's win condition is, and there's many win conditions that actually just can't really win if you Equinox them. This is a really powerful card as long as you're like thinking ahead to how the late game board state is going to look like. The easiest example is if your opponent's playing a They Who Endure deck, which is Callista Freljord, you should always pick Equinox. Kind of no matter what, because when they play They Who Endure, you just counter it with your 1 mana card. I would literally never not pick Equinox in that matchup. Now it's slow, so it's potentially going to be counterable by Atrocity, but unless they wait until turn 10 with full banked mana, they can't play Endure and Atrocity on the same turn. So just make sure you have 1 mana for the Endure, and you'll be perfectly good. Another great one is like Swain Leviathan. If you see a committed Swain deck, you can pick Equinox early because you know they're going to play Leviathan, and if you silence their Leviathan, they're pretty screwed, right? So just make sure that with Equinox, you're thinking ahead to their final board state. And the same with Crescent Strike. There's a lot of decks like Nightfall often has to develop into their attacks, and those kinds of decks can just get super blown up by Crescent Strike. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to general tips. So, one really big thing. Okay, number one, here's the biggest tip of this deck, period. Don't fall into the trap of thinking about the game in terms of value. You need to always be asking yourself, do I need this, right? Like, do I want value out of this? A big example is Zenith Blade. A lot of people look at this like, okay, it's Grant and Ally +1/+2 and Overwhelm, and Daybreak is even better because you draw another Zenith Blade. In reality, the majority of situations you'll never need another Zenith Blade. Do not feel like you are pigeonholed into trying to play this for the Daybreak, right? That doesn't matter. That, like, sometimes it matters, but it will very rarely actually matter. And there will sometimes be better sequences, or, you know, playing this the turn before could be really nice. So that's a really, really big deal, and don't get baited by that. But there's many other examples in this deck of that happening. There's a lot of situations where, you know, you'll be in these, like, mid to late game turns, and you could play Solari Priestess, but maybe your hand is already made. Maybe your combo's already there. Like, if you have everything you need, and if you don't need to find something that deals with the opponent's strategy, like Comet or, God, what's the other one called? The deal 4, deal 1. Meteor Shower. Falling Comet or Meteor Shower. If you don't need to deal with the opponent's strategy, if you have all the combo pieces you need, spend your mana on other things. Save your mana for, like, Deny or Concussive Palm, or spend your mana on, like, Mentor to make your strategy complete and, like, make sure you're killing them on that turn, right? So that's a really big deal. A big thing, sometimes this deck will pretty often have 10-card hands, because you will be, you know, dying with Mentor of the Stones. When it dies, it gives you 3 gems. So you'll have a 10-card hand. And a lot of people will feel like, well, I can never pass on a 10-card hand because if my opponent passes back, I don't get to draw. But ask yourself, like, do you need to draw? If you have everything you need in your hand, and maybe your opponent isn't really looking at that good of a pass, you can absolutely pass. But sometimes they'll get baited. They'll see you have a 10-card hand and be like, hee, I'm going to burn this guy's card. If you have everything you need, just don't think about it in terms of value. Think about your combo and your game plan, right? And think about what you need to execute that. And honestly, I think that if you kind of like, if you watch the last like 10 minutes, took in like the Mulligan guide and the tips, you're going to go pretty far in this deck. I'm just going to go ahead and hop into some Master Ranked games, and I'll play this deck. It's actually quite nice. Like, usually when I want to show off a deck recently, I've been playing a lot of normals because I've been messing around with a lot of like lower tier strategies recently. But this is absolutely a deck I could just play ranked with, because we can gain some points while we're showing off the deck at the same time. Why not? So we're against an interesting opponent. This is a Zed Lee Sin deck. Now, there's some people messing around with Zed Lee Sin. It's basically a more aggressive version of the strategy, wherein Zed is sort of like an alternate buff target, right? And you can see he's rocking 3 Zeds, because Zed is on the left side. If he was using less than 3 Zeds, it would be on the right side of Lee Sin. So, as with our, you know, our general anti-aggro approaches, we're going to want to keep Eye and Claw, right? Mentor is a good keep in general, but because we're keeping Eye and Claw, we're going to need spells to combo with them early on, right? And this is one of the big things. So we have to kick away Mentor and just make sure we're trying to find our combo pieces. We don't need to play in early turns of the game. A lot of people ask, you know, why aren't we running, you know, more Gift Giver, stuff like that. Stuff that plays in the early turns of the game. And the real answer is banking spell mana is a perfectly great strategy. We do need spell mana to, you know, use Eye and Claw anyway. There's not that much we gain by actually banking that. Unfortunately, we can't block this because it's very easy for him to have Pale Cascade there. Now, that doesn't represent a Pale Cascade on that attack. He knows we couldn't block that. It's a bluff spot. So we've got a few different things we can do here. We can Guiding Touch, Behold, which would allow us to double claws. We could pass here, which could maybe get a pass from him, which would be good. We do want to summon the Salamander if possible, but because we're the Stally deck and he's the more aggressive one, this pass is perfect. We want to see what he does first, and that could potentially inform our play a bit. Okay. So we do have the ability to, you know, Behold into Guiding Touch or something like that. Try to summon like the double claws. That honestly wouldn't be bad. We'd be getting the Salamander on defense, which is a lot less useful. But we'd actually have an attack with the claws here, and you know what? That actually wouldn't be useless. Let's Behold first and see what we get. Oh. Well, these are going to be a little useless in this game. We can go for the Charger. Honestly, this is a pretty bizarre spot, but we could actually try to play for a little bit of aggression here. Oh, hell yeah, we can. Alright, so yeah. Remember when I was trying to like show you guys how this deck works in like an average situation? This is not an average situation. This is a terrible guide. When I'm doing a guide, I'm supposed to like probably delete games like this. I'm trying to find like a more average game, but I don't want to cherry pick. Like, I want you guys to see exactly what games we happen to see. This is just like a really edge case game. So there's a fairly good chance he could Pale Cascade here with his Eye of the Dragon, and that's the Pale Cascade we put him on. Now, you'll notice something very interesting about that, which is we put him on a, like, you could put him on a Pale Cascade from the attack before. It increases the odds. And he played it from the second to left card in hand, which means he actually had it drawn that turn, which means he could have the second Pale Cascade in his hand because of the position he played it on. When someone plays something from the left side of their hand, like they just drew it that turn, it increases the likelihood by far, by a lot actually, of them having a second copy. And the Shadow, keep in mind, he double drew that turn because of Shadow Assassin. So he drew 2 cards that turn. That's really interesting. Alright, so yeah, we have a super bizarre hand here. We're kind of like blocking out his attack. We've got, you know, a nice Lee Sin to potentially play out here. Okay, so now we've got a choice. Do we play Lee Sin or Solari Priestess? Lee Sin offers actually a little bit more tempo to this board. We do actually have the ability to jam in an attack, and if he tries to stop it, he doesn't really get that much value. Solari Priestess just gives us a draw. I think we're likely going to want to open attack on 5. I'm actually just going to go ahead and Lee Sin here. We don't need to keep the mana for anything, and there's nothing on this board that would make us need the Solari Priestess yet. We actually gain a little bit of extra value by just like potentially threatening some chip damage here. And because part of Lee Sin's balance change was now he's getting Sonic Wave instead, we have the ability to play for the open attack, and you know, Guiding Touch isn't bad either. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much going to have an awkward time here. There's a good chance he'll have to use, like, Concussive Palm or something like that. Yeah, I'm very happy taking this open attack. So, we could go for challengers. We could, like, open with Lee Sin Sonic Wave and try to, like, challenge his units down. In this case, because we have the aggro strategy, he's kind of forced to take some aggressive blocks anyway. And we don't actually gain that much value from like dictating combats, right? Like if we drag his 3 attack unit, you know, we're probably getting concussive palmed anyway, so there's no point. He can save his units with like the second Pale Cascade, which he could easily have. Likely his play is just going to be some random spell into Pale Cascade. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, we're able to kill down this Eye of the Dragon, which is really nice. Now if we want to, I mean, I could try to like +2 this, but really I'd just like to keep these spells for more reactivity. Also, leaving up our Solari Priestess as an option is really nice. There's just like, he's a really reactive deck. He's got 8 mana floating. There's so many things he would do in exchange to us that like I don't want to open commit with things that I'm trying to hedge minor value on, right? This is the perfect Priestess because we're still getting our Daybreak. And we even have some pretty great options here. Meteor Shower is pretty great. Fallen Comet is pretty great. Because we're kind of scared of his board, let's go ahead and just go for the Meteor Shower here. So, if we were more scared of Lee Sin, we might go for the Fallen Comet. But the Meteor Shower is actually going to be, on average, pretty decent here. Being able to deal 1 additional damage to something else, in addition to being able to cost 1 less mana, makes it a bit more valuable. Unless you need to kill something big, unless you need the Obliterate tag, this is going to be just fine. We draw Hush, which is a great safety card here.
Force is meaningless without
okay.
skill.
A pleasure to see you, Master.
Wow. So we do have the ability to basically just try to shut down his attack here. He's probably going to have Challenger and Barrier. We do want to make sure that he's not getting like any unique value off of that. The Zed isn't really doing that much. We want to just go aggro. We want to basically force him into an awkward position. And unfortunately, the Meteor Shower actually has a pretty high chance of getting blocked out. A big thing that would force that would be Deny. Although if he denies, he actually doesn't get the Eye of the Dragon. And he probably doesn't get the Lee either. He would need a 1-mana spell. You know what? We're actually pretty safe against Deny here. Bastion might mess us up. Bastion could be kind of awkward. We could pop it with Hush. That would be okay. So this is the play we're choosing to make. We had two different options there. We could have hushed aggressively. The thing we could have done with Hush is we could have hushed like Eye of the Dragon plus Lee Sin or something like that. We actually probably wouldn't have hushed Zed, which is pretty funny. But because we have the aggressive board in this case, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are not playing defensive and we're playing aggressive. We want to silence the Eye so he doesn't get the Dragon Link. He's about to play multiple spells here, right? Like any hand he could be on is about to play 2 spells. Summon a Dragon Link on defense and challenge and bury or something with Lee Sin. I don't want that to happen. So the preemptive double hush on these could have stopped that, which would have been nice. We could have also done it like after he played some spells, but I actually really value getting the Zed out of the way and just playing for like the more consistent game plan here. There's the Pale Cascade. I think he played that from the left side again. Unless I'm missing, unless I had like an optical illusion.
You've been in my thoughts.
Oh, Lee, you always did think too much.
Within my grasp.
Okay, this is pretty great. Alright, so we do really want to threaten down his Eye. His Eye is worth quite a bit. We could also hush his Lee Sin to kill it with Barrier. That would be pretty big, because of course just getting rid of its Barrier and being able to kill it is very, very huge. I honestly think that is probably the best play here. I mean, we can like try to hush the Dragon Link. So the biggest thing is we just want to go as aggressively as we possibly can here. Honestly, if we're going aggressive, his Lee Sin matters a lot less than the Dragon Link. If we're just trying to be aggressive, we can try to bully him out like this.
Our enemies cannot hide.
So the interesting thing about this is that if we do this instead of Hush, our Lee Sin gets the Barrier, right? Giving us a better block. If we had Hush, we could kill the Lee Sin, which matters a lot. But we have no way of stopping the Eye of the Dragon's Dragon Link, and that represents 2 blockers, whereas the Lee Sin only represents 1 blocker here. We knew he had the Resonating Strike in hand, so blocking with an unbarriered Lee Sin is no good. So by getting the Lee Sin's Barrier, it allows us to not block with Claws of the Dragon, which actually gives us a pretty threatening open attack here. And if we open attack with the Touch... Oh, that's a good draw. Then on top of this open attack, we can also challenge his Lee Sin with our Lee Sin. And you know what? He could easily have Spirits Refuge. So let's go ahead and drag to the right side here. I don't think that deck should run Spirits Refuge, but might as well be a good habit. Spirits Refuge is a card that gives his unit lifesteal. So because combat goes left to right, I could kill him before the lifesteal happens if he uses it.
Our enemies cannot hide.
Okay. All he has to do is double play spells to get Barrier, and that is what he's doing. And now what we can do is we can basically force out his Concussive Palm. That would be pretty high value. So if we just do this, we can force out the Concussive Palm, because now he needs that to stay alive. And then once he palms, we can hush his Lee Sin so his dies and ours lives. Oh, Will of Iona. Okay, same thing. So now we hush his Lee Sin. He's out of mana, so he can't stop us with anything. And now our Lee Sin is barriered and kills him, and his just dies for free. And that feels pretty good. And this is kind of like the value of tempo or aggression. This is the entire point of, like, tempo, which is we don't have to kill the opponent early, but... It is funny that we get the calls back on the same action. We don't have to kill him early, but by dealing a lot of damage early, we're forcing him into a position where he has to make some bad exchanges, right? Like he was forced into that will because otherwise he would die. Okay, I mean, I don't really need to do anything off of that. I can just replay the Lee Sin afterwards and kill him like that. So yeah, this is, as you can see, just from playing this out, it's a very good deck. You do have to think about a lot of things, but it is, you know, it's a really rewarding deck to play. And it's very, very powerful. This is maybe my favorite deck in the game right now. I would highly, highly recommend this deck. Let's go ahead and jam in, let's jam in one more game. I'm literally just gonna, I'm gonna keep it rolling so that you guys know I'm not like cherry picking these games. That's the thing, like, I don't really have too much, like, it depends how it's presented, right? I don't mind guides that do cherry pick games just because, I mean, the thing about some games is that they're outliers and it is important to show off more average games. But I also, I mean, if you do that, then you're not going to know, like, you guys won't know how to deal with the outlier games. And it's really important, not just when you're playing this deck, but playing any deck, you know, you need to be able to shift your game plan when you have a hand like that. When we have a really aggressive hand, he was the aggressive deck, but we had the aggressive hand. So we're the aggressive player in that matchup. Okay, so this is Ash Sejuani. We're going to go ahead and keep Eye of the Dragon, trying to look for some spells to play. We can keep Spacey Sketcher as well. There's a specific reason we're keeping Spacey Sketcher here, which is Ash Sejuani is often playing Trifarian Glory Seeker, and if he plays a Glory Seeker on turn 2 before his attack, I really want to play a Spacey Sketcher. I don't want to sacrifice my Eye of the Dragon to a 5-1 Glory Seeker here. So, and this was because he was attacking on evens. So that's another mulligan tip. Make sure you look at which side the opponent's attacking on. Matters a lot. We have a pretty great hand here. We have, you know, the Eye of the Dragons. We've got, like, Behold and Pale. We're ready to just, like, summon a bunch of Dragonlings and start popping off. Now, we always have to think when we're in a pretty good position. We always have to ask ourselves, you know, what are the danger cards, right? He could have Reckoning, for example. So we want to make sure that we are giving ourselves the ability to play around it. And that means, in this case, banking enough mana for something like Deny. Okay, so we could take an attack here. If we attack, we can Pale Cascade when he goes into block. This attack basically, you know, it could represent a Pale Cascade. I'm actually pretty happy with this attack. The biggest thing you could do is like a Troll Chant. Yeah, that deck is running Troll Chant these days, right? I'm the defensive player here. If I take an attack and I'm forced to like Pale Cascade and then Behold when I don't want to, that would actually be pretty bad. I really, really don't want that. I'm actually just going to go ahead and Spacey Sketcher here and see what we get. So we got to go for the Messenger in this case, I think. The Messenger, we're going to play the more passive, more defensive role here. I think that's pretty important. He doesn't really have that good of an attack, so we're not going to need like the double Dragonling this round. But the other thing is like there's a lot of similar hands that would go for the Moonsilver in that case, just to double play spells. But we're low on resources, right? If Behold the Infinite doesn't give us something that's like high value, we're going to run ourselves out of resources very quickly. We do need to like maintain our draws and make sure that we're not running out. This is the perfect Written in the Stars opportunity. Absolutely ideal. This is exactly the situation why this deck doesn't run another champion, because now we have access to our Lee Sin. It's going to be a buffed Lee Sin, which is great, and it's a spell which we even need in this situation to, you know, trigger the eyes and stuff like that. Okay, so in all likelihood he's going to attack, and then we're going to like Behold Pale. Honestly, we could Behold before his attack. It's kind of like, there actually could have been some stuff that we could draw that would change our play, I guess. 3 men. I could see, yeah, I could see the 3 men having come out there. Okay, so that would have been a bit better. I don't know if I'm actually getting that much value out of it. Honestly, at this point in time, I don't as much need like the maximum value play, but I think that's kind of like the most reliably valuable out of these. Let's play for the long-term game plan, and we do just want to make sure we are killing something. We're playing pretty committally into Culling Strike if we go for anything though, which is a little dangerous. Yeah, this was awkward. I played into Culling Strike in a pretty bad way. Like, being at 0 mana, him at 3, on his attack, with a 3-4, blocking his 3-2, is pretty bad. Or blocking his 3-3. In theory, like, my block should have been different. Like, I should have swapped Claws and Eye, so that if he had Culling Strike, I would have, like, you know, still killed his better one, and not left his worst one up. But yeah, that was definitely a weak play on my part. We got lucky, and he didn't have, the Culling Strike. Okay. So now we've, you know, we've got our pure Dragonling value. That's really nice. We don't have to play Lee Sin yet. There's just no reason for it here. We could develop into this attack, but that makes his stance a little bit better. There's some cards like Reckoning that feel pretty good against us if we develop in. We don't have like amazing answers to them. We honestly have a pretty solid attack here. We could attack with the 1-2, but we'd rather maintain like the ability for just chump block here value. And let's just go ahead and take this attack here. He doesn't really have good blocks. The only reason we would attack with the 1-2 is like if he has Reckoning, then our 1-2 is dead anyway. But in that case, like dealing 1 damage to the 5-4 wouldn't really matter. So we can't really be too afraid of Reckoning. Like if he Reckonings here, first of all, a lot of decks don't even run many Reckonings, but also it's just not that insane of a Reckoning there. Now, if we were to commit like a double spell, that would make the Reckoning a lot more juicy. We do want to make sure we have like good blockers for anything he could have. It's a little early to play Lee Sin. We're between Messenger and Traveler right now. I'm just going to play the Messenger. I want things that are better at just being pure chump blockers. The Traveler is a little bit less good to block with, and banking full mana just gives us maximum flexibility. Now, I want to mention one thing, which is I was actually going to mention at the start of this video. I was going to say, okay, here's a good counter to this deck. This is one of them, Frostbite. I can almost guarantee you this guy's playing Frostbite because there's a lot of people playing Lee Sin right now. And Frostbite in general, you can build Frostbite in a few different ways. But the most like, you know, the most common way to build Frostbite is like Ash Sejuani. Because when you just Frostbite Lee Sin, you know, denies don't really help you. Bastion doesn't always help you, even like if we're running higher quantities of Bastion. And overall, yeah, Lee Sin is just really vulnerable to just getting frozen out. Even like Reckonings can hurt some early game situations that this deck has. So right now, if we did want to, we could play a bigger Lee Sin. We could play a 5-6 Lee Sin off of Written in the Stars. That would give us only 2 mana remaining, so we wouldn't be able to give him Barrier. We could play our Lee Sin here and then just try to get the Barrier for free off of using like Guiding Touch and Hush. We don't really have a good Hush right now. I think the better play is to take a nice early Concussive Palm. We want to make sure we're, you know, shutting down the Sejuani, I think. We don't really need to keep this Eye of the Dragon alive. It's actually okay if it dies here to one of the other challengers. Basically, we just don't really quite have enough room to play Lee Sin yet, which is fine because we're not really in a hurry to do it. We just want to make sure, you know, we have good blockers for anything he could be doing. We don't want to let Sejuani get, you know, a free Overwhelm attack because keep in mind, the Sejuani level up is not a major threat here, but I mean, the Overwhelm attack does influence it. Our deck doesn't really have great abilities to deal 1 damage, so I'm perfectly fine just sacrificing the 2-2, even the 1-2 in this case.
Back, heretic.
Sure. Okay. And then if we want to trigger a Salamander, we could use Guiding Touch at that position, right? We could also just try to Written in the Stars here to trigger the Salamander, which is pretty great, and gives us a bigger Lee Sin. In particular, it's outside of the range of Culling Strike and Reckoning, which is really, really nice, because it's actually very possible he could be looking at a Culling Strike and saving it for Lee Sin. Honestly, he's trolling if he's doing that. That was a perfect Culling Strike. Because, like, you can't guarantee that I'm going to be, like, out of mana for a response. But he could still have something like Reckoning, which we don't have, like, an amazing answer for. It's nice just having the Lee Sin being bigger. Okay. So Solari Priestess has some outs here, right? We've got Obliterate, which we couldn't play this turn with it because it costs 6. We've got Falling Comet, which can actually do some damage to his board, which is pretty nice. But unfortunately, playing the Lee Sin might just be a little bit too much value here. Being able to start like the Challenger and bury a train is just too nice. And the second Lee Sin, the unbuffed one, can still be Sonic Wave, which is great. An absolutely amazing turn. Icefield Archer, again, this is why Frostbites really counter this strategy. So I can play a total of 3 spells here, right? I can almost level my Lee Sin with the Guiding Touch and the Sonic Wave. Just one off. We do still have the ability to like challenge something for value, which is nice. We can deal some damage to his board, trade off a couple of things. And we don't really have a good target for Guiding Touch. I think overall we do absolutely want to basically start the process. We can go ahead and give our Dragon Link Challenger. That's going to be very useful here. We are going to get the free barrier. Yeah, I'm the one who's sad here, man. Yeah, I think Dragon like this is best. Wow, there's no way he actually has Culling Strike. He saved Culling Strike. That's pretty crazy. All right, so that's one Lee Sin down. We have Guiding Touch, which isn't going to be useful here. Yeah, we can activate that later. That's going to be perfectly fine. Okay. That's pretty good. We don't really have the ability to play around it there, because even with Hush, we're no good. Yeah, so that's actually an interesting play. I think we misplayed that a bit. I read from his play that he couldn't possibly have Culling Strike, so I committed the second Lee Sin there. But what I probably should have done is I should have only played one Lee Sin. Because if he has Culling Strike, I needed the second Lee Sin there. And it's a little too easy for him to have Culling Strike there. So, I think that's fine though. We played 2 spells, which means we are getting our Salamander. And we've got Deep Meditation. So we still have plenty of ways to win this game. But yeah, in hindsight, we could have big brained that. We could have just kept both the Lee Sins in hand. So the Ashe is going to be leveling up here. Not this turn, unless he has a really bizarre hand. But when it levels up, we can try to hush it down to enable us to block. And I think this is kind of the perfect Solari Priestess. We need a chump blocker. This is pretty interesting. He has a really, really beefy board. Deal 4 and 1, obliterate an enemy. Okay. I mean, we're forced to take the obliterate, I think. It's not really great here. And yeah, you can see, like, just playing this game out, there's a reason people are playing Frostbite on ladder right now. If you're seeing nothing but Lee Sin decks on your ladder and you want to counter them, play like Ashe Sejuani Frostbite. It's the perfect counter to all this Lee Sin stuff going around right now. Like, it's not like you're literally always going to beat them, but it's, for many, many reasons, just like super well positioned into it. Yeah, we can do this here. This is fine. The big issue is it's pretty likely he has Brittle Steel or like second Ashe for Flash Freeze here that he could use on the Dragonling for pretty good value, keep him alive and stop the lifesteal. But the Blocker Dragonling is a great target for, you know, the buff that we have on Pale Cascade. We played the 2 spells we needed to this round to get another Salamander next turn. Basically, our win condition at this point is to try to like out-grind or out-value him or pull our third Lee Sin. And the big problem with this matchup is like we don't really have a good ability to out-grind or out-value. Like his deck is like the perfect out-value deck, right?
Breathe in, breathe out.
Mystical levitation requires
All right.
concentration.
Oh, let's see it, buddy. All right. Okay.
No.
This is quite interesting. Honestly, just buffing the Dragonling and allowing us to lifesteal a little more off of it is a pretty big deal. And we have good spells to like follow up this situation.
Show them our teeth.
Just playing around the other one, Meteor Shower. What was it called? I can never remember the names. Interesting. Okay. Perfectly fine with this. I mean, I'm about as fine as I can be. We now need to basically just chump him down, right? Oh, man. Traveler might be necessary. Yeah, we're pretty screwed, guys. I think I have to combat the Ashe and hope he doesn't have a second one. That's probably the best play here. The one nice thing is, like, sometimes if you're not getting outvalued, what you can do is you can, like, hush the Ashe so that, you know, you can still block with your units. Like, Ashe is no longer a kill switch. The only problem is that deck just has infinite ways of dealing with your Lee Sin, right? Like, even if you have the Lee Sin and even if it's big and buffed, when you attack with Lee Sin, if they go to freeze it, you're in a really, really good position. Like, Ashe Sejuani is a rough matchup. Okay. So yeah, we're just gonna try to chump block as far down as we can, basically. Yeah, Mentor of the Stones is alright for that. The biggest problem is if I chump with Mentor of the Stones, I might overfill my hands. We can actually just Traveler here instead. I mean, the Trickster is just not as valuable. Honestly, Moonglow is kind of important because it sort of gives my Lee Sin a bit more of an out. Giving him Spell Shield and stopping, like, the freeze from happening is actually quite nice. The only problem is they can respond with the freeze, so it doesn't really do anything.
It was my art that led me here.
Oh well. Guess he got us. All right. So yeah, I mean, if you wanna farm Lee Sin on ladder right now, just literally spam Ashe Sejuani, and you'll be good. We can Trickster here. Trying to get literally any blockers we can. But yeah, the thing is, even if we draw the Lee Sin at this point, even if we hadn't misplayed earlier and had both Lee Sins, we are still just at the mercy of, like, his Swarm Freezes. You'll notice, like, so his hand range on these 3 cards, the 3 cards that he played before he played Trifarian Assessor, the hand ranges on these cards were, like, second Ashe, which he just played. There's Harsh Winds. Almost certainly one of those cards is Harsh Winds. Basically stuff that will just, like, blast our combo over and over and over again so that our combo can't work and they'll just eventually just slam the board with enough beef to just win. Like he's doing now. Yeah, I mean, being able to block with these isn't really helpful. It just keeps us alive for 1 turn. Yeah, okay. We'll do that. We'll see. I mean, it can't matter, but I'll give myself an opportunity to actually try it. So I've only played 1 spell. We do have to play the second spell to reap our rewards. In this case, it can actually be Guiding Touch. Sketcher could get us a draw. So we do have our Lee leveled, and we do have the 2 remaining Lee Sins in our deck. Deep Meditation can't draw it. Guiding Touch doesn't have the ability. Alright. So we can Deep Meditation first. We want to be Deep Meditation like plus Spacey Sketcher on a turn like this, I think. Even though this game is lost, I'm still going to play it out just because, you know, we can still show, like, how to execute our combo, how to look for it, that kind of thing, even though we can't win this game anymore. We're forced to play a Spacey Sketcher. Got a good discard target here. Stun to enemies could actually be useful, potentially, if he's trolling. He's gonna open attack, basically, no matter what we do. And we already have Concussive Palm anyway. We're still looking for the draw here. It's a little late to find Lee Sin this turn, since we wouldn't have enough mana to play him with anything. So the Messenger isn't as helpful. We can play Mentor as a potential blocker. Yeah, let's Messenger here. I mean, I could totally concede at this point. There is actually no way we can win. Like even if we had Lee Sin, we still gonna win. All right, there's nothing more to show. We can concede. That's a really, really hard matchup. I'm not just saying that. Like, our entire win condition just gets pretty swamped down by that. But overall, this is still a very good deck. And that matchup is a large part of the reason why a lot of people feel like this deck literally can't be tier 1, just if it has a matchup that is so unfavorable. There are some major hard counters to this deck, but it has an absolute great time just absolutely plowing so many other decks on ladder, right? Most of your matchups, a majority of your matchups are going to be very, very favorable. It's a super fun deck to play. I'm glad I was able to show that last game, though. I don't want to, like, over-represent decks or something like that, because a lot of decks I do play are, like, meme decks, and a lot of people say, oh, Swim doesn't play good decks. He only plays meme decks. And, like, I mean, that's not actually always true. There's a lot of that's true, but I'm not really trying to hide that fact. Like, when I'm playing meme decks, I want to be very clear. These are meme decks. Don't try to get the masters with this. This isn't a meme deck. This is a deck that's very, very good. It has one and a half, because there's a few different ways of, like, playing Frostbite concepts. It has a couple of, like, super unfavorable matchups, but it'll do very well against the majority of ladder. I'm glad we were able to show that last game, because I don't want to misrepresent what this deck is or what it has the ability to do. Super good deck. I'd highly recommend it, and if you follow the guide this way through, you'll have a pretty great time playing this deck on ladder and smashing your opponents. Anyway, guys, that's it for this video. Again, I mentioned it at the start, but check the pinned comment, because that's going to have any version that might have been updated. And I'll see you guys next time.